Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant. Graham, Jesus, and Matthews here, and today I'll be reviewing the final installment ever of Judgment Day. And if you've been missing it, make sure to go back and check them out. My reviews of all the other installments of Judgment Day, including 98, 2000, 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, 06, 07, and 08 from the last couple of weeks. The Judgment Day pay-per-views have either been okay, good, or really great. So you're missing out on some great shows if you haven't been listening to those reviews and watching these old pay-per-views. That rhymed, and unintentionally. But here today, Judgment Day 2009. And the thing about this pay-per-view is that, and it's funny too, because I love doing this WrestleRant series because it not only gives me an opportunity to go back and watch content that I've never seen before, matches that I've never even heard of from like the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s, but it also gives me the opportunity to, again, not only watch pay-per-views that I've already seen, like a Money in the Bank 2011, a pay-per-view, my favorite pay-per-view of all time, that I may not have seen in a couple years. It gives me the opportunity to do that. But it also gives me the opportunity to watch pay-per-views that I was a fan for, like Judgment Day 09. I was already a fan of wrestling. I was already a fan of WWE for a little over a year, but I had never actually seen the pay-per-view itself. At that period in time, I was not buying pay-per-views. I wasn't watching them online or anything like that. I was just reading the results. So I already knew the results of this show, but it was the first time I've ever seen the show in its entirety. And it was cool, too, because, I actually bought the pay-per-view, and I watched it on the network, but I had it on DVD. I bought it at, FYE about a year or two ago, because it was only, $3 or $4. FYE is fucking awesome. I mean, I've talked about that before here on the channel. So I bought the DVD for $1 or $2, but I didn't watch it on DVD when I was watching it this time around, because I just didn't have the time. I just watched it on my network. It was easier to watch it that way. But anyway, after I bought the DVD, I'm thinking, it's probably a good show. I just don't really care about it because I loved Backlash. I loved Extreme Rules from 09. 09 had a lot of good pay-per-views, I noticed. It was not a great year for wrestling. 09 was all about John Cena, Randy Orton, and Triple H. That's basically what the year was in a nutshell over on Monday Night Raw. It was pretty much a repeat year for John Cena with all the people that he feuded with that year, except with the exception of Sheamus. Though the pay-per-views were really good. I mean, other than WrestleMania, I thought SummerSlam was good. The string of pay-per-views in the spring were really, really good. Night of Champions included. Hell in a Cell was okay. TLC wasn't that bad. So I thought it was a good year for pay-per-views, this one included. And in looking back on the results, I'm thinking it's pretty much a repeat of either Backlash or a preview of Extreme Rules. Because a lot of the feuds on the show wrapped up at the next pay-per-view, 2 or 3 weeks later, and I understood that. But, Judgment Day always has been, even in its final years, it was kind of like that bridge between Backlash or, WrestleMania to the next pay-per-view. It was never really that one pay-per-view to culminate feuds. And that was kind of the case here, but it was still a really enjoyable show with a lot of great action. So kicking off the show, Umaga taking on CM Punk, and this show, by the way, emanated from CM Punk's hometown of Chicago before it became known as the wrestling city of the world. I mean, Chicago has always been a great wrestling city, great wrestling town, for decades upon decades, but it didn't really get the stigma. What's the word I'm looking for here? It didn't really get the notoriety for being a red-hot wrestling crowd until, Money in the Bank 2011 when CM Punk left the company. And it's been a great, quote-unquote smarky wrestling crowd ever since. But even on this show, they were pretty good, heavily behind CM Punk, and the feud got started. I mean, even the commentators acknowledged they didn't really know why Umaga was after CM Punk. But they kind of, it was clarified at one point, I think. They never really, Jim Ross and Todd Grisham on commentary really didn't expand upon why this match was happening. But if my memory serves me correctly, the reason I believe this feud got started was because Umaga kept on preventing CM Punk from cashing in the Money in the Bank briefcase, which he was holding at this period in time. Why? I have no idea. Maybe that's what the commentators were referring to, but I do remember this feud. The reason why this match took place was because Umaga kept on interrupting Punk's cash-ins for the World Heavyweight Championship against Edge, thus leading to the match on the show. I enjoyed the matchup. I thought it was actually really good. A nice little opener involving the hometown hero CM Punk. Miles better than the strap match at Extreme Rules, which was not terrible, but it was not good. I thought it was pretty bad. I didn't think it was horrendous. Not the worst thing I've ever seen, but easily one of Punk's, worst matches in WWE, which might sound harsh, but it's not as harsh as it actually is, considering how great most of Punk's matches were in WWE from the time, that he left in 2014 to when he first got started in 2006, his matches were almost good to great, and that was not one of them. And I talked about that in my Extreme Rules review, in my 2009 Extreme Rules review from last year, if you want to check it back here on the channel, and all the other Extreme Rules pay-per-views that I reviewed a couple weeks ago. Anyway, the match itself, though, was really good. I enjoyed it. A lot of good chemistry between the two. Punk, the story was that he couldn't pick up Umaga for the go to sleep, in which he ultimately didn't until the Extreme Rules pay-per-view a couple weeks later. But on this show, anyway, he kept on trying to go for it. He couldn't do it. Umaga was always, to me, a very underrated athlete. I wouldn't call him underrated on the whole, because I think people realize how great he actually was. Whether or not he could have been a world champion, I guess we'll never really know. I mean, maybe not a WWE champion, but I could have easily seen him holding that World Heavyweight Championship. He got himself fired, ultimately. I mean, he got suspended via the WWE wellness policy, and he didn't want to go to rehab, so they fired him, one night removed from the Extreme Rules pay-per-view 2 or 3 weeks after this. So this was one of his final feud, one of his final matches. But yeah, good match to kick off the show. Umaga surprisingly winning clean. He shoved CM Punk right into the turnbuckle, I believe, or he just went completely apeshit on him, and then just released the Samoan Spike to pick up the clean win. So kept the feud going strong. Umaga picks up a big win, and he needed it too. I mean, Punk was Mr. Money in the Bank at that time, but that's always kind of the par for the course with the Money in the Bank briefcase holders, because ultimately, more often than not, they will cash in successfully. That's kind of so that all the losses they garner beforehand don't really matter. To me, they do. I don't think it's wise to always beat your Money in the Bank winner to the ground. To have people lose and lose and lose, I think that's ridiculous. But for the most part, though, their losses like this one, that was kind of their mentality here. So it was a big win for Umaga, who I think came out of an absence. He was gone for a couple months. He wasn't even at WrestleMania 25. So they needed to reestablish him as a threat, and I thought this match did that, and this win did that. So I thought this was a good match to kick off the show. Up next for the ECW Championship, Christian defending against Jack Swagger in a rematch from the Backlash pay-per-view. A good match. I thought their Backlash match was better, maybe just because they caught lightning in a bottle with Christian, winning the championship chase, finally winning his first WWE Championship, his first title in WWE, I guess I could say, not the WWE Championship. His first title in WWE in about 4 or 5 years. So it was a great moment. Love the match, love the moment. And this match too was good. Not great, like I said, there was kind of just a different story, and we had already seen the match 1 month prior, and people just didn't really care about ECW in its final year, so they weren't really red hot for this matchup. But it was good though. I thought it was solid for what it was. Christian picking up the victory after holding the tights of Jack Swagger. I mean, on paper it's a heel move, but it was Matt Stryker and Josh Matthews on commentary, I believe, representing ECW. Josh made light of the fact that Jack Swagger had pulled the tights of Christian earlier on, and then Christian, as kind of as a rebound to do the same exact thing, used the tights when rolling up Jack Swagger to pick up the win, so it was clear the feud was far from over. It protected Swagger, so kind of kept the feud going strong, and Swagger would get another shot at the championship at the ECW Extreme Rules. The not one night stand, they scrapped that name by that point, at the Extreme Rules pay-per-view a couple weeks later. So a good match. The finish was what it was. It accomplished in protecting Swagger and giving Christian a successful title victory. So I thought it was good, a successful title defense. So a good match from Christian and Swagger, as always. Up next, a singles match between John Morrison and Shelton Benjamin. In a good match, nothing, amazing. But the thing was, and this match might seem random, and people didn't the crowd wasn't red hot for it, but I didn't really expect them to. It was kind of a feud that we just kind of saw at random. They might have exchanged victories on SmackDown leading to this match at the pay-per-view, but this was almost immediately removed from John Morrison's abrupt babyface turn. He got drafted to SmackDown when Miz went to Raw. Morrison went babyface, and he kind of, he really did get over as a babyface. He was more comfortable in that role. He kind of fit that role better. His mic skills weren't any better, but he didn't have to really talk all that much as a babyface anyway. And, his flashy offense spoke for itself, and, he really wowed the crowd. He really, left the crowd in awestruck. He really made them, just in awe, left them in awe of his offense in this matchup. Same thing with Shelton Benjamin. I mean, you put these guys together, they're going to have a good match regardless, and that's exactly what this was. I was pleasantly surprised they got as much time as they did, coming in at almost 10 minutes. So that was really cool. So a really good match for Morrison and Benjamin. Not much storyline support, but it was nice, a nice little showcase for Morrison, who had just gotten drafted to SmackDown, who they were trying to get over as a babyface. So I enjoyed it. A lot of cool maneuvers here. Again, not a show-stealing, an amazing matchup, but for what it was, though, I enjoyed it. I thought it was really good, and a nice win for Morrison. And I was thinking this, too, while I was watching the show, but, at that time, I wasn't going to appreciate it because I didn't know the history they had. But how fucking cool is it that the world's greatest tag team was back together for a time, in 2009? I mean, Haas, after doing all the impersonation shit over on Raw, which was entertaining, but considering how talented the guy was, it was kind of a waste of his talent. But they reunited the two, Benjamin and Haas, the world's greatest tag team, over on SmackDown. And I didn't know until after going back and, doing some research. I mean, I knew in my mind, but I wanted to read more up on it, that, these guys were together for a time in 2003, in 2004, and they reunited in 2007 on the Monday Night Raw brand, where they did not win any tag team title gold. And then they reunited again during this time period in 2009 when Haas got sent packing to SmackDown. And why it was so short-lived, I guess I'll never really know. They wanted to push Benjamin over on the ECW brand. They turned him babyface. And, I mean, he didn't win any gold there either before he got sent back to SmackDown after ECW met its demise in early 2010. And then that was right around the time, actually, coincidentally enough, that Haas got released from SmackDown, or got released from WWE. But why they didn't do more with the reunion of these two was beyond me, because they had a pretty good tag team division around this period in time. I mean, Miz and Morrison had just broken up, but you had Carlito and Primo as the tag team champions. You had the Hart Dynasty. You had Crime Time. If you put these two back together, you would have had Benjamin and Haas. You had the Legacy, Jericho later on, Edge and Jericho. They had a really good tag team division around the time they merged the championships in early 2009. They unified the belts. And so why they didn't do more with those two was beyond me, but it was still cool to see those guys back together, if only for one night only for this pay-per-view. Up next for the Intercontinental Championship, a lot of SmackDown matches on the show. For the IC title, Rey Mysterio defending against Chris Jericho. Obviously, what do you want me to say? It was a great match. I mean, as only you could expect from these two. And the best thing about this feud was that their matches only got better. And as good as this matchup was, and Jericho had an interview earlier on in the evening with Todd Grisham saying that his promise was to make sure that Rey Mysterio would not hit the 619 and that he would walk away with the IC title. The feud at this period in time did not have much heat behind it. It was kind of like, okay, Jericho's on SmackDown, Rey Mysterio hasn't defended the belt since WrestleMania, let's just put them together. So I understood that, but and their feud would get better down the line with Jericho targeting the mask of Rey Mysterio and wanting the title at the same time. So I thought it was cool. But, yeah, I mean, the best part about this feud was that it only got better in time. The feud got better, the matches got better, and in watching this match, you would never think so, because this was a really good match, too. Got about 12, 14 minutes, so they got an ample amount of time to go out there, do their thing, rip it up, a lot of cool reversals, a lot of cool counters, awesome chemistry between these two, and just kind of going back and forth, really capturing the crowd's attention. And the crowd was behind Jericho at one point, more so than they were behind Mysterio, but Mysterio's offense down the stretch, really kind of turned the crowd in his favor, ultimately winning with the 619 out of nowhere in the turnbuckle. I think Jericho had Rey Mysterio in the turnbuckle. Mysterio reversed it somehow. Jericho went face first in the turnbuckle. Mysterio followed it up with the 619, hit the splash to retain the IC title. So a really good match from Rey Mysterio and Chris Jericho, and like I said, continued the feud between the two over the IC title, and later transitioning into Jericho wanting to demask Rey Mysterio after calling him a coward, and and so on and so forth. Up next for the WWE Championship, Batista contending for the gold against Randy Orton. So, a good match. I mean, I was not expecting a good match from these two, because their matches weren't always great. The Armageddon match, which I did not review here on the channel, but I have watched on Batista's DVD, it was good. It wasn't great or anything like that. It didn't blow me away. The one-night stand match they had at, not one-night stand, the Extreme Rules match they had inside the steel cage was fine, but it was only like 7 or 8 minutes. Like, this match got almost 15 minutes, and that match got only like 7 or 8, which was ridiculous. So they've never had the greatest in-ring chemistry, and that's why people were going to poop all over the match they were originally supposed to have at WrestleMania 30 this year. But regardless, though, I mean, I thought this was a good match. So I was not expecting much, is the bottom line here, but they superseded my expectations. I mean, again, it was not a great match, did not blow me away or anything like that. But for what it was, and, especially down the stretch, no interference from Legacy up until the ending, Batista and Orton held their own, some cool counters, Batista countering the RKO, Orton just his usual great self, and Batista holding his own as well. So a pretty enjoyable matchup, a lot more than I thought it was going to. And the DQ finish, down the stretch, it kind of got a little annoying with Orton trying to get himself counted out and then walk away with the title. And he was doing everything in his power to get himself DQ'd. So that was a little bullshit. Not making Orton out to look like the dominant champion he should have been. So I didn't really like the finish all too much, but they did end up wrapping it up, like I said before, in that steel cage match at Extreme Rules a couple weeks later. So that was fine. I just didn't really like the unoriginality, I guess I could say, of the finish. So Orton gets himself DQ'd. Legacy comes out, just beats the crap out of Batista, But out to make the save, not Triple H, not Vince, not Shane. Out comes Ric Flair of all people. I don't know if it was rumored at the time that he was coming back. I know he was still involved with WWE at this period in time. He'd done the whole shtick at WrestleMania with Mickey Rourke and Jericho. So he comes out to make the save. So that was a little unrealistic to think that Jericho, a 56-year-old man, could take out all of Legacy by himself. But they fend off the rest of Legacy. And I like the storytelling they were telling here, because, the original members of Evolution were Batista, Triple H, Orton, and Flair. Orton had taken out Triple H at Backlash after punting him in the head. He had already punted Batista in the head a couple months before this. Batista was out for revenge. And then Ric Flair, who hadn't been seen in a while, who was obviously retired, coming back to kind of help out his friend Batista. I loved it. I thought it was great. And it got a big pop from the crowd, setting up the... his time on Raw would not last long. I think Ric Flair ultimately got kicked in the head by Orton, I think on the Raw before Extreme Rules, and then he was not seen in WWE for another 3.5 more years before he came back after his TNA stint. But yeah, it was cool to see him back. A nice little, I thought it was a good match, and the DQ finish was kind of bullshit. And it, obviously, like I said before, kind of setting up the rematch for the Extreme Rules pay-per-view. But to kind of not send the crowd home happy because this was not the main event, but to kind of make up for that DQ finish, we got the return of Ric Flair. So that was pretty cool. Up next, we had John Cena versus The Big Show, and easily the worst match of the night. I crapped all over the match that John Cena had with JBL. Again, like I said in that review, it was not terrible. In the Judgment Day the year before this, in 2008, it wasn't a horrendous matchup. It was just very boring, as was this matchup. This was worse than that, but it was also just brutally boring. Cena and Big Show have never had great chemistry. I hated their matches in 2012. I didn't like their matches in 2009. The match they had, they caught lightning in a bottle at WrestleMania 20 with that fun match. I didn't think it was an amazing match, but I thought for what it was as an opener to WrestleMania 20, it was fun. Big Show was the unstoppable champion, the dominant United States champion. John Cena was a star on the rise. Hitting the FU on Big Show was huge, picking up his first title victory. It was a cool moment on the grand stage. 5 years later, that same magic was not there. Big Show was in terrible shape on this show. He did not look good, and it was obviously just time filler before John Cena. He was just biding his time before he got involved in the WWE title picture again. So the match was very boring. They beat Big Show, and the whole story going into this was that Big Show nearly handicapped John Cena at Backlash when he, did that awesome choke slam through the light on the stage, which was easily, no pun intended, the peak of this feud, the highlight of that feud, and it was all downhill from there. The rest of this was kind of like the rest of the feud kind of consisted of, is John Cena medically cleared to go? Can he wrestle Judgment Day? And he can. And then after Big Show just dominated John Cena for almost 9/10 of the match, just comes back, John Cena hits the AA, and that's it. Cena wins, LOL. It was a typical bullshit booking decision. I hate Big Show, and I wouldn't really cared that much more if he won, but the feud shouldn't have happened to begin with. The Jericho pairing could not have come any sooner. And if that didn't happen, if Edge did not get himself injured, and they ended up going with Edge in Jericho, and I don't know what they would have done with Big Show. It looked like they were putting him in the U.S. title picture, but other than that, I have no idea what they're going to end up doing with him at the, going forward on Monday Night Raw in the summer of 2009. But yeah, this was a brutal match. Very boring. John Cena wins. Nothing new there. So easily the lowest point of the night on this pay-per-view. Up next, we get to the main event for the World Heavyweight Championship. Edge defending against Jeff Hardy. And kind of a rematch from Royal Rumble. I almost said Armageddon. That was a triple threat match with Triple H. It was a really good match. I enjoyed this for what it was. I mean, people didn't really have any reason to believe that Jeff Hardy was going to win. He had just, actually, no, he was already on SmackDown, but he was in contention for the World Heavyweight Championship. He wanted to prove that Edge was a fluke champion. And again, they were just biding time before Punk turned heel, and they went into that fresh feud. We had already seen these two work together before, but no complaints because they always worked well together, almost getting 20 minutes. Maybe not as much time. I mean, these guys did not need that much time considering the finish that we ended up getting. But for what it was, I thought it was a really good match. As always, from Edge and Hardy. Hardy was over as all hell in 2008 and 2009. That was very evident on this show. And Edge playing his awesome heel tactics very well, as always. So that was cool to see. So the finish came when they were on the outside, and then Matt Hardy, of all people, who was obviously familiar with Jeff Hardy, I mean, they're brothers, of course, but they had just gotten done feuding at Backlash. Hardy had beat him in the I Quit match. So Hardy comes out, just completely out of the random, through the crowd, hits Jeff Hardy over the head, I think with his cast, costing him the victory. Edge would roll him back in the ring, Jeff Hardy that is, not get the 1-2-3. Hardy kicked out of 2, and then Edge would follow up with a spear, or I think he did an execution off the top rope, which was an awesome spot. Not sending the crowd home happy, but that was a good match and an awesome moment, an awesome move to end the match on and end the night on. But yeah, to have Matt Hardy come down, isn't he on Raw and isn't Jeff on SmackDown? That doesn't make much sense. They already blew off the feud. Why are they doing this? Well, basically, if you didn't watch the whole show, you would know that, if you did watch the whole show, you would know that Matt Hardy encountered Vicky Guerrero earlier on in the evening after he was having some back and forth with Edge. I think it might have been, was it the night after Extreme Rules? I think it was the night after Extreme Rules that Edge divorced Vicky, so they were obviously building to that. Yeah, it was the night after Extreme Rules, because then Vicky quit or she got fired or something like that. So Matt only did this for a shot at the U.S. Championship. He wanted to please Vicky, help my husband retain the world title, and I'll give you a shot at the U.S. title, which ended up happening the next night, in which he lost. But Jeff never ended up getting revenge on Matt. I mean, they would reunite a couple months later, oddly enough. But they never really, they were on separate brands, so they couldn't anyway. So it was just weird. I mean, I get the story they were trying to tell. It helped Matt, it helped Vicky, it helped Edge. It just kind of made Hardy, it kind of just made Jeff look like a goof because he couldn't get his revenge on his brother Matt. So that was weird. But it was a good match, though. I liked the finish. Edge had to retain here. It led to a rematch, a ladder match, which was an amazing match. I already talked about it in my Extreme Rules 09 review from last year right here on WrestleRant at the Extreme Rules pay-per-view for the World Heavyweight Championship. So this was just kind of a filler match between then and now. But a good match to end the show, nevertheless. So Judgment Day 09 on the whole superseded my expectations. Definitely exceeded my expectations for sure. I thought it was a good show. I thought it was going to be kind of boring because I already knew the results. And a lot of these matches we just saw rematches of at the next pay-per-view anyway, so why should I care? But the in-ring action was really, really good. The only bad match on this show was Cena and Big Show. You don't need me to tell you that. The rest of the matches on this show were really good. I enjoyed the undercard. I thought was great. Onumaga and Punk having a better match on this show than they did at Extreme Rules. Christian and Swagger, a solid matchup, building to the rematch at Extreme Rules, also involving Tommy Dreamer. Morrison and Benjamin, a fun little showcase between them. Mysterio and Jericho, in my opinion, the match of the night. Great match for the IC title. Batista and Orton, Edge and Hardy were good matches. I mean, I know people were probably not fond of the finishes with Matt's interference and then the Legacy interference and Orton getting himself disqualified, but it led to a bigger picture. It was, in the grand scheme of things, better, leading to the rematches at the Extreme Rules pay-per-view a couple weeks later. So I thought this was a good show. Definitely go out of your way to watch it. It's not must-see or anything like that, but it is an enjoyable 3 hours. If that, I think it might have been 2 hours and 45 minutes. 2 hours and 46 minutes, I want to say. But yeah, an enjoyable show. A lot of great in-ring action. The main events were good. And just kind of, a good pay-per-view. So check it out at your leisure on the WWE Network. So that's going to wrap up my reviews of Judgment Day as seen on the WWE Network from 98 to 2009. Had a lot of fun watching them. Had a lot of fun reviewing them. So if you watched all the past reviews and listened to this one, of course, thank you for all your support. I appreciate it. But by no means is this the end of WrestleRant. WrestleRant will continue on forever and ever and ever. I don't know about that, but it's going to be continuing for the foreseeable future. As coming up tomorrow, as today is Sunday, tomorrow, May 31st, on the day of Elimination Chamber. No, I am not reviewing Elimination Chamber pay-per-views. Not just yet, maybe next year or something like that. I already kind of booked out the entire WrestleRant series up until WrestleMania next year. And Elimination Chamber I don't think is on the calendar, maybe until February or something of next year. But coming up, though, for Sunday and then for next Tuesday, my birthday on June 2nd, I'll be reviewing past Payback pay-per-views on Payback 2013 and then Payback 2014, not 2015. Usually I wait for that year-long window because reviewing it 2 weeks later doesn't make any sense. For my full thoughts on that show, they're already up on my website, nextitawrestling.net. I want to kind of do a retrospective review of those pay-per-views right here on WrestleRant 2013, 2014, 2013 tomorrow on Sunday, 2014 on Tuesday. From there, I'll be reviewing every Money in the Bank installment from 2010 to 2014. So that's going to be pretty fun for the first few weeks of June. And then from there, from mid-June to mid-August, my reviews of SummerSlam. Every installment I have not already covered. I think I already talked about 88 or 2002. What were the other ones? 08, 2011, and 2013, I think. I don't know if I reviewed any other installments other than those. But those will be up, or those already are up, and my other reviews of SummerSlam will be up over the next couple of months. So as always, folks, you can catch me on Twitter at WrestleRant, on Facebook at facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews, and my website, nextitawrestling.net, for my full reviews of Raw, SmackDown, Lucha Underground, starting next week, Ring of Honor, which I'm excited to announce, and live coverage of some of the pay-per-views, Raw from time to time, some SmackDowns, and other shows like that, so stay tuned for that. And that's going to do it. And make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. Have a great weekend, folks, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow with my review of Payback 2013.